This happened a few summers ago when I went camping with my best friends Ahmed, Daryl, and Chris. Daryl knew of a remote spot in the woods that his uncle had shown him. He and Chris were experienced with the outdoors, but Ahmed and I were fairly new to it. It was a few hours away from our town, and we drove there in Daryl's dad's truck. We made our way through the twisting roads and steep mountain passes. When we finally arrived, I was struck by the sheer beauty of the place. It was a 2 or 3 hour hike from where we parked the car. There was not another person to be found. We were really alone out there. The campsite was surrounded by dense forest, and there was a small creek running nearby. We set up camp and spent the afternoon exploring the area. It was public land and not an official campground, but it was a somewhat established site with a fire pit already there. As night fell, we built a campfire and settled in for the evening. We cooked up some dinner and cracked open a few beers. We only managed to carry in a single six-pack, so that's all we had. The conversation flowed easily, and we were all having a great time. We called it a night around 1 a.m. and went to our tents. We had each brought our own tent, and we set them up next to each other on the only flat part of the site. I woke up in the middle of the night at around 3:30 a.m. I heard the sound of rustling in the bushes. At first I thought it was just an animal, but as I listened closer, I was pretty sure the steps sounded human. I lay there frozen, listening to the footsteps. I figured the only thing to do was to wait it out. I eventually fell back asleep and woke up at 6 a.m. In the morning, I didn't tell the guys what I heard. In fact, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not. We did some more hiking in the area and had a pretty good day. But when we came back to the site, we noticed that some things were missing. Ahmed's lighter and knife were gone, both of which were left next to the fire pit. We looked at each other puzzled. Who could have taken them? We were the only ones there. As evening fell, I felt a sense of unease settling over me. I was paranoid that somebody was watching us. I never told my friends though, I just kept it to myself. I was really scared. We went to bed again at around 12 or 1. Like last night, I woke up at 3, but this time it was because I had to pee. I got up to go to the bathroom, and found myself staring up at the full moon. The moonlight was really bright, probably the brightest I had ever seen. I could see a fair distance into the woods. That's when I saw him, a man walking along in the distance. He was taking slow, deliberate steps and dragging his feet with each one. His clothes were tattered, and he wasn't even wearing shoes. I wanted to hide, but there were no large trees nearby. He turned and looked at me as he walked. His eyes were really creepy. The man smiled, and I felt a chill. It was a really remote spot, so this was weird. I couldn't understand who that guy was, or why he was out there. I went back to the tents and woke up the others, and then I told them what I'd seen. They were all a bit spooked, but we decided to stay put for the night. We huddled together around the fire, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every twig snap and rustle in the bushes made us jump. We kept our voices low. We didn't want him to hear us talking about him. We continued to hear footsteps throughout the night, but I never saw the guy again. Maybe he didn't want to be seen. I don't know who or what was out there, but I was pretty sure that it wasn't friendly. In the morning, we all agreed to pack up and leave. We didn't want to risk running into that guy. We had another day planned, but we all knew that it was time to go. We hiked out for 3 hours, hardly saying a word to each other. It was tense. We finally made it to the car, and we felt relieved. That was when we knew we were safe. We never found out who he was, or if he was dangerous, but Ahmed never got his knife back, or his lighter, so we knew the man was armed. It may have been the most vulnerable feeling I've ever felt. We were sitting there in the night, not knowing where that man was. He could see us, but we couldn't see him. When Daryl told his uncle what happened, he was shocked too. He had used that site countless times before, and he knew how remote it was. There were hardly any other people out there. It was a real mystery. My friend and I had a camping trip planned. Neither of us had ever been before, so we booked an easy campsite with all the amenities you can think of. We packed up all the essentials and more. When we got to the place, we saw that our designated campsite already had a tent set up, but it looked old. It looked like it had been set up weeks ago, and it was pretty beat up. There was a fire pit, a backpack, and a bunch of other camping stuff. We went to the office to ask about it, but they said they didn't know what we were talking about. We led them back to the spot, and it was gone. Everything was gone. It was only a 10-minute walk back to the office. There's no way somebody could have packed up all that stuff and left absolutely no trace. The officer said we must have been in a different spot, but we were both sure that we had gone to the same spot. We tried to forget about it. We set up our tent, which took us longer than it probably should have, but like I said, we had both never been before. Once it started getting dark, we started prepping a fire and got some marshmallows. A camping cliché, I know, but you really can't beat roasting marshmallows. We just kind of sat around the fire and talked while eating a couple marshmallows, and then we started to prepare for bed once the fire died down. Once we were all cozy, we started hearing footsteps behind us. We explained it away as an animal, but the footsteps were heavy. I would think most animals would try to walk as quietly as possible. We just laid there in silence. I think we were both too scared to move. After a couple of moments of lying there, we started to hear the footsteps circling around us. They started to sound like they were walking away, so we decided to peek our heads out, and my heart sank. Right in front of us was the campsite that was set up earlier, but there's no way somebody could have set it up so quickly. Without thinking, we both decided to leave everything and run. It sounded stupid at the time, but we didn't even bring a phone or a flashlight. We just ran to the office, and the park ranger decided to come with us, but this time, when we got back, everything was gone. The creepy campsite and our campsite. The ranger was also in disbelief because he'd never seen anything like it either. To this day, we have no answers. We just know that we'll never go camping again. I went camping with my friends Ralph, Angus, and Raoul the summer after we graduated. We had been best friends through most of high school. Our other friend Todd couldn't make it because he started college the year before and he was still away. We had all been camping before, but not in this area. We were warned to be careful of bears, but we were not worried. We were all well versed with bear safety, and Ralph even brought his rifle just in case. We had been told that the campsite we had chosen was beautiful and peaceful, with a lovely lake and lots of hiking trails. One of our teachers had told us about it, and we were pretty excited. We drove to the site, and then we had to hike in about 3 hours because there was no car access. It wasn't a difficult hike. You could probably do it on a four-wheeler if you had decent skills. We didn't have one of those though, so it was walking for us. We carried our tents, sleeping bags, and supplies on our backs. The trail was beautiful. We joked and talked the whole way. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. We saw some bear poop, but we didn't care. In fact, we actually wanted to see a bear. We reached our campsite with plenty of sunlight left, and we were amazed by how beautiful it was. We found a spot by the lake and set up our tents. There were lots of trees and plenty of shade. The water was crystal clear, and we could see fish jumping occasionally. We gathered some firewood and built a fire. I was feeling adventurous, and I decided to explore the area. Raoul came with me. We hiked for a few hours, enjoying the beautiful scenery. As we walked, we found more evidence of bears. There were scratches on trees and large piles of poop. We started to get a little nervous, but we reassured ourselves that we would be fine as long as we didn't do anything stupid. We returned to our campsite and sat around the fire roasting marshmallows and telling stories. By then, Ralph and Angus had hoisted what was left of our food into a tall tree to keep it away from the bears. That's really the minimum that you need to do. We stayed up late around the fire. It was a perfect night so far. We went to bed at around 3 a.m. I was sound asleep as soon as I laid down. However, I was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of screaming. I sat up confused and disoriented. It was still dim in my tent. It seemed like the sun was just rising. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 5:20 a.m. I heard loud growling noises. I poked my head out of my tent and saw a huge bear tearing apart Angus's tent. Angus was screaming and trying to get away. I was frozen in terror, and I didn't know what to do. I got out of my tent and stood there watching. I wanted to jump in and help my friend, but I knew I couldn't. Suddenly, Ralph jumped up and grabbed his rifle. He fired a warning shot in the air, and the bear disappeared. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, and my ears were ringing. I turned to Ralph, who was still holding his rifle. He was pale and shaking. We realized then that we had to leave the campsite right away. We packed up our gear and took off down the trail. Ralph was clutching the rifle the whole way. We were too scared to stay in the area, even though we had planned to stay for another 3 nights. We hiked back to our car as quickly as we could, not wanting to look back or think about what could have happened if Ralph had not been there to scare the bear away. We made it back to our car and drove to the nearest ranger station. We reported the bear attack. He told us that we were lucky to have escaped and that we should always be careful when camping in bear country. We drove to a nearby town and found a cheap motel where we could spend the night. We talked for hours about what happened and how lucky we were to be alive. Ralph came out looking like a hero, and to be honest, he deserves it. A terrifying thing happened to me and my sister Carly a few years ago. We both hadn't taken a vacation in a long time, and wanted to have a chance to catch up. We were in our early 30s. I'm 2 years older, and it was becoming more and more difficult for us to spend quality time together. Our plan was to spend 3 nights camping, with 3 or 4 hours of hiking in between sites. We were both excited to get away from our normal lives. On the first day of our trip, we parked the car at the entrance of one of the trails. As we began our hike, we were about an hour in, and we encountered a man named Tom. He was around 45 years old, tall and muscular with a gray beard. Tom seemed friendly at first, and we chatted for a few minutes before we moved on and went our separate ways. We had seen a few other people on the way, but none of them stuck out. The park was vast, and the further we went, the fewer people we saw. We hiked for a few hours and finally reached our first campsite at around 3 p.m. We set up our tent and some other things. We were tired from the hike and we decided to rest for a while. As the sun began to set, we started a small campfire and cooked some dinner. We sat around the fire talking and enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. I was exhausted after the long day, so we went to bed early. I fell asleep almost immediately. I've always been comfortable sleeping in a tent, but in the middle of the night, I was suddenly awakened by a strange noise. I opened my eyes and saw a shadowy figure standing outside of our tent. It was Tom. As soon as he saw me, he disappeared into the forest. I was startled and frightened, but I didn't want to scare Carly, so I decided not to tell her. I was hoping that it was just a weird coincidence, and that Tom was passing by our campsite for some reason. But the next morning, as we were getting ready to start our hike for the next campsite, I saw Tom again. He was standing down the trail away from us, not moving, just standing there, watching. We decided to press forward anyway, and we reached the next campsite before sunset and quickly set up our tent again. As we were sitting around the fire, Tom appeared out of nowhere. He sat down next to us and said some really creepy things. We could tell that he was becoming increasingly agitated. We were scared and didn't know what to do. We tried to tell him to leave, but he wouldn't listen. He kept circling our campsite and staring at us. We spent the whole night sitting up, too frightened to sleep. We kept the fire burning all night, hoping it would keep Tom at bay. The next morning, we packed up our tent and hiked all the way out of there. It was a 2-day hike in, but we managed to do it in just under 3 hours on the way out. It was a little more downhill on the way back, but we also made good time because of the circumstances. We were happy when we finally reached the car before sunset. We reported Tom to the park rangers, but nothing came of it. They said they would keep an eye out for him, but they didn't seem too concerned. Part of me feels like they thought it was all in our heads, but it wasn't. That guy Tom was following us, and I have no doubt that he would have done something if we spent another night out there.